that Shevardnadze's decision was irreversible.
The minister is convinced that he had to make this sacrifice now in order to save our young democracy.
As this morning's session of the Congress began, Shevardnadze's resignation and its possible impact on Soviet foreign policy was the chief topic of discussion.
I'm convinced there will be no change in foreign policy because the majority of the population support Gorbachev's line.
Other deputies are not so certain.
No doubt it will be some changes in the foreign policy of the Soviet Union, because the Soviet Union of Mr. Gorbachev, of President Gorbachev, is drifting to the right, very clearly.
And preventing that drift to the right by calling Soviet and worldwide attention to it is exactly why Eduard Shevardnadze resigned. Mike?
Rick, what about the average Soviet citizen? Are we hearing anything on the streets yet and how they feel about what apparently is a bit of a power struggle, or at least a change in leadership?
Well, their reaction is shock. They expected that Shevardnadze would stay in office as long as Mikhail Gorbachev. They are worried about his calls for, or his concerns about a dictatorship, something that many people here are indeed talking about.
What about the Soviets trying to send out signals to its allies at this point and to its adversaries past and present about its future course? Are they actively engaged in a reassurance campaign at this point?
Well, there is some reassurance going on, but mainly the Soviet government is tending to its own affairs right now. Right now at the Congress of People's Deputies, there is a lot of debate about the future course of the country, and they are mainly focusing on their internal concerns, not their international.
Thank you, Rick. ABC's Rick Endiford reporting for us live this morning from Moscow. Turning our attention now to the Persian Gulf itself. America's top defense officials are talking war strategy with both U.S. and Saudi commanders. Defense Secretary Dick Cheney and General Colin Powell, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, spent 2 days at the drawing board. Well, today the paperwork becomes more personal as they visit the troops currently on Desert Shield duty. A top Army official has apparently just gotten a slap on the wrist now for talking about the combat readiness of Desert Shield troops. That general, Calvin Waller, is the second highest ranking American officer in Saudi Arabia. Earlier this week, he said U.S. ground forces may not be ready to go to war against Iraq until the middle of February. Defense officials now say even if that is true, U.S. air and naval forces are already ready. All the talk of war has not been lost on Baghdad. The Iraqi president ordered a partial evacuation of his capital, Baghdad, today. It is a dry run of sorts to see how quickly the capital can be cleared out in case of an attack by the U.S.-led forces currently in Saudi Arabia. We get more on the story now from ABC's Morton Dean in Baghdad.
Iraqis getting ready for war. It's a civil defense drill. Several thousand residents from a city, Saddam City, evacuated 12 miles out of town to a large, flat, dusty plain. Here they would sit out an air attack if there's war after January 15th. He says, we came here to practice in case of an American attack. The preparations are simple. Some medical personnel, 3 rows of tents. The theme is familiar. They want peace, but will fight if they have to. He says we will fight to the last drop of blood and the last child. Officials here say that other cities will practice evacuations in the weeks ahead. The civil defense program began in earnest last Saturday when Iraqi TV initiated a nightly series about survival in wartime. Morton Dean, ABC News, near Saddam City, Iraq.
Other news regarding the Middle East now. The United States got the best it could hope for at the United Nations yesterday. The Security Council unanimously approved its 3rd resolution against Israel this year, condemning the Israeli treatment of Palestinians. But this does not include a call for an international conference on the problem. U.S. diplomats were finally able to move that provision into a non-binding side letter. But even so, there is anger in Israel. ABC's Dean Reynolds reports.
Quiet prevailed in Jerusalem this morning, but inside government offices there was anger and determination to ignore the UN once again. One official said the failure of the United States to veto yesterday's resolution had rewarded Saddam Hussein by distracting attention from the Gulf crisis.
We are dismayed by the adoption of this resolution, which lacks any kind of balance and does not take into account the realities on the ground.
Including the recent stabbing deaths of 8 Jews, not mentioned in the resolution, even though Palestinians are the suspected assailants. Officials here say it's that Palestinian violence that made them resume deportations. But the UN condemned that policy, to the applause of Palestinians.
I believe it is a step in the right direction because it condemns something that is happening at the moment.
The October 8th killing of 17 Palestinians by Israeli police during a riot in Jerusalem propelled the UN to act. But Israel has exonerated its policemen and claims the incident was a Palestinian plot to provoke bloodshed. And as Prime Minister Shamir suggested, Israel will pay no more attention to yesterday's resolution than it has to all the other anti-Israel measures now stored in the archives of the UN. Dean Reynolds, ABC News, Tel Aviv.
In this country, visions of the Wild West are making a comeback in the East. The officers who patrol New York City's subway system are now going to start carrying semi-automatic pistols, weapons that can fire twice as many rounds as the revolvers now in their holsters. The transit cops say these weapons are more accurate and therefore safer. Critics argued they're more powerful and could hurt more innocent bystanders. We will take a break right now, have more news in a couple of moments, including the sports and your first look at the weather.
On yesterday's question now, the first free agent in pro baseball was Jim Catfish Hunter in 1974.
MasterCard has something special in store for you this holiday. Master Values. Now use MasterCard and save up to 25% at some of your favorite stores. Save on the latest music at Sam Goody and Music Land. Coats to camcorders at Montgomery Ward, and save on Mattel toys at Toys R Us. Look for Master Values only from MasterCard at these and other fine stores. And master the moment.
Oh, no!
No one says no to cocoa.
How many pancakes have you eaten? No way.
Oh, yes, she did, because Mom switched to Bisquick. They're light and fluffy, and Bisquick doesn't have cholesterol.
I didn't know that. Did you know that? She knew that.
Bisquick makes the day's pancakes.
Shop Radio Shack, America's technology store for all your Christmas gifts. Personal computers for every home and office need.
For the widest selection, nobody compares.
Camcorders, VCRs, and high-performance sound.
For outstanding value, nobody compares.
Telephones, answering machines, radios, tape recorders, and everything in electronic gifts.
For quality products, nobody compares.
Plus toys and games for kids of all ages.
Nobody compares!
For all your Christmas gifts, shop Radio Shack, America's technology store.
April in Paris.
He said he'd give me Paris wrapped up in ribbons. But he was young and poor, so we settled for a small cafe and coffee. Coffee so rich, I thought I'd never taste its like again.
Maxwell House captures the richness of France with its rich French roast coffee. They start with their best beans and roast them the French way. That's why it's the French roast rich enough to be called Rich French Roast. Maxwell House Rich French Roast.
Time for the sports right now. John Snyder coming by to talk about some pretty good basketball. John?
Good morning, Mike. With the great season the Portland Trail Blazers are having, any win over the Trail Blazers will be worth remembering. The Golden State Warriors got a win last night, beating Portland by 7, only the third loss of the season for the Trail Blazers. The Golden State hero was Tim Hardaway, the former Texas El Paso star, scored a career high of 36. That included a key basket late in the game on a steal and a score. Portland, even with the loss, still the NBA's best at 22-3. Seattle beat Sacramento. Boston won at Charlotte. Larry Bird scored 16 for the Celtics last night. Boston has now won 6 games in a row. Reggie Lewis led Boston with 24, including this follow-up as Boston made 8 of its first 9 in the second half to win by 19. Houston beat Orlando in overtime. Atlanta by 18 over Utah. Dick Versace was fired yesterday as coach of the Indiana Pacers. He's been on that job less than 2 years. His team was 9-16 this year. Assistant coach Bob Hill will take over Indiana, at least for the rest of the season. In college basketball, number 3 Syracuse is accused of several NCAA rule violations by a Syracuse newspaper, which did a 7-month investigation. The NCAA will be asking questions. Syracuse won last night over Towson State. That game was played in Hershey, Pennsylvania. And the game was a homecoming of sorts for number 30 of Syracuse, Billy Owens, who's from the area. He makes the alley-oop pass right here to Larry Johnson. Owens, one of the best players in the country, made 13 of his 20 shots. He scored 30 points. Syracuse is 10-0. Virginia, Michigan State were winners last night. LSU raced by Loyola Marymount. Shaquille O'Neal scored 53 earlier this week. The LSU star last night had 29 as LSU pulled away late to win it. LSU has a record of 7-1. Here's a man who always has a winning record. Spencer has the weather.
Except in the stock market. Let's take a look at today's maps and find out what's going on with the weather. It is still brutally cold out west. High temperatures over much of the western two-thirds of the nation will be below zero or in the single digits or in the teens, which is almost a warm wave out there now. All the way down into Southern California, record lows are being experienced. And, of course, wind chill factors feel well below zero over the northern plains and northern Rockies. Meanwhile, in the southeast, in sharp contrast, highs will be at record high levels in the 70s and 80s, approaching the 90-degree mark in parts of Florida. The outlook calls for sunny skies in the southeast and clearing up in the far west, but heavy snow continues over the central and southern Rockies. 2 to 3 foot accumulations likely in some areas, reaching up into the northern plains and upper Mississippi Valley. More snowfall and heavy showers and thunder showers in the Tennessee and lower Mississippi valleys. That's a look at the national weather. Here's a look at the weather where you are.
It looks like a rainy, mild day for the first day of winter. Maybe an afternoon thunderstorm. Our high at about 48. Rain overnight, periods of rain on Saturday with a high temperature in the 40s. Then it turns much colder, and look for a white Christmas.
I have more on today's weather coming up a little bit later as ABC's World News This Morning continues.
This morning's weather brought to you by Folgers Instant.